Welcome to the show, Tru-ID Apologetics in the building, and we got my man, the legend, Johnathan Pritchett Prime. What's going on, man? What's happening with you?
Happy to be here. Thankful that you're having me on finally.
Right.
We've been planning this for a while, and most of it's my fault, but at least I didn't put you off as long as Braxton Hunter. But this will be a better show than that one anyway, so
That's true.
it'll be good.
That's true. Yeah. Braxton had me waiting a little while, but I still take some jabs at him on that one, for sure. But yeah, but glad to have you, man. So before we get into it, man, the most important question that I can ask here, starting with the serious stuff up front.
Okay.
Where did you get the name Pritchett Prime? How did that come about?
Well, there was a Trinity radio episode a few years back. It's an audio. We actually took the audio and made a YouTube clip of that audio because people have asked that question a lot. What was the origin of Pritchett Prime? And some people think I have split personality disorder and some other things, but we were talking about evidences and arguments for the soul and substance dualism. And Braxton gave an analogy where he was talking about if someone had made a clone of me, would that still be me, or would it have the same center of consciousness, or would it be a completely different person, even though it was identical to me in all these ways? And so that was we were using that as a thought experiment to talk about why substance dualism matters and the consistency and nature of your own first person self-awareness and consciousness and identity.
Sure.
That can sustain throughout time. And then he just kind of went nuts like a crazy movie with this and said, so I'm Pritchett Alpha, then you have Pritchett Prime, and Pritchett Prime goes nuts and starts slaughtering people and being rude and ugly to everybody. And then it just kind of stuck that whenever I start to get, most people think that I'm generally a really nice and friendly guy. I've even heard, I'm not saying this to toot my own horn, I've even heard that I'm actually fun to be around.
Okay, all right, yeah, sounds good.
Not something I'd ever say about myself, but others have said that I'm fun to be around.
Right.
So they find it odd sometimes when I can get kind of cutthroat and straightforward and ruthless about certain things at certain times. So
Right.
That's where the Pritchett Alpha and Pritchett Prime, whenever I would turn into kind of a jerk, they would say that's the prime. So that's where that came. So I want to, if people go to the Trinity Radio YouTube page, they can watch the little video. There's me, and Braxton made me look like a robot Terminator. It says the origin of Pritchett Prime. So that's kind of where the nickname came from.
I was wondering if you had like some sort of dark, origin story or something like that, like Batman, or some sort of trauma. Driving Pritchett Prime.
I wish it was that cool. It wasn't. I've had nicknames over the years. I had a performance name back when I was doing music. It was Trusty, but now everyone calls me Prime. So I don't know. People just always give me nicknames for one reason or another, and so that's what I had. Because like you, I used to dabble in some music.
Yeah, man. We talked about that. Right.
Yeah, I was supposed to send you some tracks, but I forgot to.
No, it's all good. It's all good.
See, I'm a patron of your program, so I want full disclosure here. But if you were a patron of our program, you would have already heard my tracks because they're uploaded on our Patreon.
Oh, snap. Shots fired. That's that exclusive content that you just called me out on, because if I was a patron, I'd have it. Yeah, I got you, man.
Yeah. No, I don't want you to be a patron. Then there's no point in me giving you. We just trade money, so it's just doesn't make any sense. No, I need to get you that. I just keep forgetting. I think one of our MP3s are somewhere it's Cross Soldiers somewhere on the internet somewhere.
Okay, cool.
I tried to go to our old MySpace page from like 15. I don't know if your audience, even if they're young.
Oh man, I don't even know. Maybe. Well, I just turned 40 yesterday, so I'm getting up there, man.
Welcome to the 40s. I've been there for 3 years now. Yeah.
Yep.
Everything's changed for you, hasn't it?
Yes.
Wake up, your back's hurting for no reason. Don't know why.
I woke up this morning. I had arthritis in places where I didn't know you could have arthritis in, and all that. Yep. You know what I'm saying? So I mean, I think if you go into MySpace now, man, you might does MySpace even exist, or like you just kind of log on and get like a virus on your computer or something? I don't know.
There, but it won't play any of our music from the old pages. And it's been so long, I don't even know the login information for it.
Oh yeah, man, I couldn't remember mine to save my life right now, for real. You know, so all right, so we talked a little bit, around a little bit. I know we're joking about the name and stuff, but tell our audience a little bit about who you are, your ministry and what you do, man.
Okay, well, my job, my full-time job is the vice president of academic affairs and professor at Trinity College of the Bible and Theological Seminary here in Evansville, Indiana. So that's my day job. So I oversee the academic programming, and I teach classes in the apologetics and the biblical and theological studies schools here at Trinity. By enrollment numbers, it appears that we're the third largest seminary, at least in the U.S. and probably the world, in terms of students. We have students in over 120 some odd countries, so we got them from all over. And Braxton Hunter, who you've had, and you've been on our show. He's the president of the seminary, and he and I both do the Trinity Radio podcast, which is a YouTube and audio podcast. And we do ministry events. Braxton does a lot of apologetics conferences and evangelistic events, and we do some of those together, and I do other conferences. And so we do stuff like that as well. Our passion, though, is probably church ministry. Whenever we get invited to churches, or he gets invited, or I get invited, or whatever, we don't ask for money. We just love offering and help pay for our travel. And all of our patrons help pay for our travel expenses and stuff. And we love to go do apologetics conferences and old school revival evangelistic meetings where we like to see people come to know Christ. So we do those kinds of things. And Braxton's been doing that kind of evangelistic ministry for decades now. And what I did before back when I've been doing a different kind of ministry, like I used to do the music ministry too. So before I started doing this kind of thing in church ministries and church meetings and stuff like that, I did the ministry through my music. So when we would go perform, it wasn't just we're going to go play some songs and get off the stage. We were going to get you a spin in your nightclub, and we'd had to dodge some bottles tossed at our heads, but you were going to get the word. So Amen. Evangelism for both Braxton Hunter and myself has been a part of our lives since probably our teenage years. And so that's kind of apologetics, theology, biblical studies, all of that is put into service to be more effective at evangelism, because that's the highest calling and the highest priority for us and for Christians in general. And so everything everything you see at our, like even Leighton Flowers, who's a professor here at Trinity. Oh yeah, Leighton Flowers. His full-time job is, evangelism down there with the Texas Baptists. And so evangelism, that's part of kind of all three of us. Evangelism is at the heart of everything we do. So everything at the seminary is geared towards not just head knowledge, not just entertain yourself with information and propositions and content, but so that you can be effective in ministering to the Christians in your community and reaching the lost people in your community. Amen. Now I have to go here, man. I was thinking about maybe addressing this a little bit later, but just kind of as you're describing your background in apologetics and just your deep roots in evangelism and being in this apologetics community for quite some time, I'd be remiss if I didn't, speak on just events that happened earlier this week with Ravi Zacharias, who also was, exemplary in kind of in terms of evangelism fused with apologetics and engaging the mind and that sort of thing. You being in this community for quite some time, would you mind sharing a little bit about that? And just kind of from your perspective, somebody like a Ravi Zacharias, like what he meant to the community and individuals like yourself. Well, Ravi Zacharias, his ministry was as deep as it was wide. There's one of the things about apologetics communities now is there's a lot of pretenders. I'm as happy as I am to see more apologetics. I'm not happy to see there's more bad apologetics. And Ravi was from, that class of apologists who did believe that they were evangelists first. They also did believe that you had to, it couldn't just be all head and it couldn't just be all heart. It had to be the combination of head and heart. And I think between him and William Lane Craig, they are the exemplaries of that. But even more so than William Lane Craig, who is probably esteemed as the best apologist of our time.
Sure.
That's more for the more interested layperson on up. But Ravi was the apologist from the headiest of academics to just the average churchgoer could relate to what he was saying, because he took everything off the top shelf and gave it to you in a way that you could digest it and understand it, make it make sense. And he was so good at communicating truth to people and so effective in the way that he didn't have to be a Pritchett Prime. He could just turn a phrase and completely shatter any counter argument to.
He was sharp, man.
Claim.
Yes, he could. Yeah.
And one thing that I would say about him that I appreciate is you could tell that he read everything worth reading. And I don't think that a lot of people who get into apologetics, they don't read everything they need to read. I like to think that I've read a lot of what I'm supposed to read, but I haven't read everything I need, especially in the 21st century where we find ourselves in our cultural moment. I could share with your viewers that I was asking you and our friend Matthew Jackson. I was like, okay, this is what I have read. This is what I haven't read. So what do I need to read from this to understand everything we're dealing with in the culture today?
Yeah, I have great respect for that. Yeah, I got you.
Yeah, and so I've increased my library based on recommendations of reading from guys like you and Matthew Jackson, so that I'm not left out, because you want to read as broad as possible so that you can engage as broad as possible. Because I take a different line of thinking than what most apologists, I guess, and not at the highest level, but that level right under the William Lane Craigs and Mike Laconas.
Gotcha.
These up and coming apologists, they give a lot of what I think is bad advice. What they give is this advice is, you need to, if you want to be an apologist, don't get a degree in apologetics. You need to specialize in one thing and one thing only. And I think that's absolutely ridiculous. It's okay to specialize in one thing, but don't just know that one thing.
Right.
We would do a lot better in culture if we had a lot more generalists like Ravi than, specialists. Because
yeah, absolutely. I mean, to your point, because you can't do the amount of speaking events that Ravi was doing all across the world, dealing with all kinds of folks. You can't do that amount of ministry and be effective in all those settings unless you're well-rounded in your apologetic, knowledge. I mean, you've really got to be able to dip into different bags when the time is right, and he was able to do that fluidly. I mean, it was really something to watch, man. Really something to watch.
Well, yeah, and I think more apologists need to take that on board, because he didn't just read Christian apologetics books and he didn't just read evangelical scholarship. You can tell that he was well read in what we call the canon of Western literature. Like he knew how to engage with thinking that stemmed from Hume and Nietzsche and Voltaire and all of that, all the way through to the modern era with Dawkins and Dennett and all those guys. He reached back and he was well familiar with what's called the Western canon. And so I think more apologists would do better to don't try to specialize in anything until you've become well acquainted with everything. So
what's interesting too, and now I'm going to say something. I'm not sure if this is the appropriate time to say it or not, but it's my show, so I can do that.
You do what you want.
But one of my pet peeves is that I think that with Ravi, sometimes amongst the apologetics community, and maybe those who are kind of just getting into apologetics and really have a hunger for it, I think sometimes there was this inclination to look at Ravi as being like your starter apologist, that you kind of, maybe you started with him at the shallow end and then you move on to some of the, the deeper guys or whatever.
Yeah.
And I think there's a real lack of appreciation amongst some for the mental giant that he was. And I tell people all the time, like, don't get it twisted. Like, there are instances where you can look at some of these clips where you can see that if he wanted to go there, he could go there.
Right.
But he had his way about ministry, and he made it accessible to everybody that he possibly could. But people shouldn't mistake that for a shallow base of knowledge. And I really think that, if anything that people can glean from his legacy, I think that they should appreciate him, dumbing things down for the people that he was dealing with, if you will.
Yeah, it's actually the opposite. It's that because he had the highest of caliber of mind, he was able to communicate and channel it down to disseminate the information to as broad of an audience as possible. And that's the key to being an effective apologist. If I had to choose between being the smartest apologist or the most effective, I'll choose most effective every time. Mm-hmm. Because a lot of the smartest apologists are basically irrelevant to the ministry, and they're not, and I know that sounds harsh, but they just are. I know guys, brilliant thinkers, but their impact for the kingdom is almost non-existent. So,
well, sure, yeah. And to your point, the first time I heard of Ravi Zacharias, and I'm sure you can relate to this, but the Cross Movement, gospel rap group called the Cross Movement. It was the first time I heard of Ravi Zacharias was when he was shouted out by Tonic on one of their tracks, and I'm like, well, who's this new Ravi Zacharias? And that was the first time I heard of him. And later on, the Truth actually, on one of his albums, incorporated Ravi and some interviews and his album and things like that. So Ravi was always looking for ways to reach outside of whatever bubble he was in and find ways to minister to different types of people. And that's a certain type of intelligence. Like, it's not something everybody can do.
Yeah, and he had all the head knowledge too. It just he didn't need to showboat it. And you've been on social media, you've seen these apologetics groups and these apologetics types and the atheist types, and they're all trying to showboat how much they know. Right. Which is a lot less than they think. But
Pritchett Prime is coming out.
Yeah. Yeah, but I mean, what are they really doing? Oh, you're arguing with people on Facebook. Way to go. You should feel really proud. Jesus is really, really happy about that. You're spending hours of your time arguing in threads that no one's ever going to read. Okay, if that's what you want to do with your time, I'm not going to knock what you do with your time, but there are better things to do if you want to be an effective apologist. Go out and witness to people and talk to people on the streets.
Yeah, man, get it done, man. Get it done. Yeah. So now with that being said, kind of switching gears a little bit, one thing that we discuss, another thing that's kind of been in the headlines rather, slightly before Ravi, is this issue with Liberty University. They came out about a week or so ago, and they basically cut their philosophy department. I understand that they'll still have some classes woven into maybe some other educational tracks, but I wanted to bring you on, as somebody who's in that field, who understands that seminary life and just kind of the process of education. And it actually kind of makes me think, even with Ravi, I mean, you talked about that philosophical mind merged with the boots on the ground. And, most people, they really have to spend time being equipped for that. And that's what you're all about. So can you kind of take us into that a little bit? What are your thoughts on Liberty University's move and maybe some of the implications of that?
Well, I think it's a disaster is what I think it is. And I have some colleague friends of mine that are professors there that have somehow survived the slash of the Rawlings Divinity School and still working there. And I've expressed to them, I've actually, for full disclosure, I got my bachelor's degree from Liberty.
Oh, really? Okay, I didn't know that. Okay.
I'm not proud of it though, and it was like vacation Bible school for grown-ups. And I told Dr. Leo Purser, who runs the PhD program at Liberty's Rawlings Divinity School, I said, part of the problem with your enrollment in your seminary degrees, your graduate and PhD programs, reason why y'all are struggling is because had I had a good experience at Liberty in my undergraduate, I probably would have went there for my master's and my doctorate. But because the undergraduate school is enormous, but it's not. People think it's a Christian college. I mean, it's enormous because they give nursing degrees and teaching degrees and accounting degrees and all that kind of stuff.
Sure.
And, yeah, so that's why they're huge. They're no longer the largest. I think Grand Canyon overtook them as the largest Christian university.
I didn't know that. Okay.
But the same thing there. I mean, the seminary stuff's really small. It's just a tiny part of it. Liberty's not really huge in terms of their divinity school. But this is just more bad news for them.
Yeah.
Because they had already laid off about 12 or 13 professors out of the divinity school and the graduate programs, and then they just slashed their entire philosophy department. And they did say what they're going to keep is they're going to keep probably an intro to logic class for the undergraduates. They're going to keep they're going to keep a intro to philosophy and an ethics. They're going to keep some of those gen ed courses that are part of every bachelor degree program, right? So they're going to have a faculty member or two still around for those basic gen ed courses. But when you get rid of a philosophy department, you're going to get an adjunct or something to teach these basic gen ed courses,
right?
Probably online, because that's mostly what they do anyway. And having gone through their online program is nothing like ours at Trinity, because Trinity, you'll actually get lectures from your professor. And of course, Trinity's professors, I mean, you can find us everywhere. I mean, we're pretty accessible.
Gotcha.
Sorry, hang on.
Uh-oh. Blackout.
Everyone knows this about me that's ever had this. I have a detector behind this hutch right here. You can't see it. And it can't see me. So every now and so I've recorded videos in this office for my courses, and in the middle of every lecture, that light's going to go. It's going to go off again before we're done. No doubt.
I thought Liberty University had you under surveillance or something, man, and you bad mouthing them, and they just shut you down, bro. I was like, snap.
I can only be honest from my experience. I'm not trying to tear down another school, but I do care about higher education, and I think that they should do better. And I've said so to my colleagues there, and they, they know that, but they're not going to say anything about that because they don't want to get the hatchet either. But losing when just because you have a basic introduction to philosophy course in your gen ed program, which is probably what they're key. And then of course if they teach an apologetics class, some broader ideas of philosophy will swing in there. They're pulled from philosophical thought in service of apologetics, and of course we do the same thing in theology.
Right. Mm-hmm.
But having a philosophy department and trained philosophers, or even if you don't have a whole department, if you have a full program in philosophy or philosophy of religion, like Trinity would have, or something like Southern Evangelical Seminary or Biola, where I also went to Biola. They have J.P. Moreland. Come on,
oh man, it's
a
legend, man.
Great philosophy. It just gives the university a level of credibility and balance with the theological and the apologetics.
Right.
Because what people don't realize is that when you engage in theology, when you engage in biblical studies, even when we talk about hermeneutics, when we talk about exegesis,
mm-hmm.
What is your method? The second you start talking about your method, you're stating philosophical presuppositions about what proper method is. When you talk about apologetic arguments, when you talk about, and logic, everyone needs to have logic. That should be just basic to
they should. You're right,
yeah. But when you de-emphasize philosophy, it's a recipe for madness.
Yeah.
It's a recipe for irrational nonsense. Because I've told people that I like, good philosophers make great theologians. Bad philosophers make terrible theologians.
Right. Yeah, that sounds about right. That sounds about right. Yeah.
Now, I know if you read Colossians 2:8, the Bible talks about not being held captive by empty philosophy.
Right? Sure, yeah.
But that's that's bad philosophy. That's not just, the Bible's not against philosophy.
Right, right.
And one of my pet peeves is people talk about, well, that's just man's philosophy, not the Bible. Well, that's when you say you should just read the Bible, the second you try to make sense of it, you're already doing philosophy.
I'm glad you said that, because that's something I wanted to touch on as well. Like to help maybe the average Christian, or just maybe some of my newer watchers or whatever. Can you talk a little bit about the intersection between philosophy and theology? Because you're right. When people hear theology, it's like, oh, okay, yeah, I get that. We're talking about the Bible, God, blah, blah, blah. But when they hear philosophy, a lot of times people who are unfamiliar with it, it's kind of like this boogeyman, or like this weird, mysterious whatever. Yeah. And I think people don't understand the intersection between the two. Like, can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I mean, philosophy at the end of the day is just love of wisdom, right? And you've got branches of it: metaphysics, ethics, politics, logic, those kinds of just standard branches of it, aesthetics. But all that, so doctrine and theology comes from taking the Bible as your source material and drawing conclusions from it. So in systematic theology, for example, what you're going to do is you're going to look at various passages, try to do the best you can to exegete them in context, but at the end of the day, you're going to look at various passages that all deal with the same subject and try to systematize it to make one coherent statement about what God is like, or what the end times are like, or what happens in salvation, what happens in sanctification, what is justification. You look at what is election, all that kind of stuff, all the systematic theology topics. Well, the second you start reasoning and drawing inferences and conclusions from all of those data from Scripture, you're doing philosophy, right?
Sure.
So if you talk about you can't talk about the Trinity and talk about the categories of God being one being and the categories of it being three persons, but it's not three persons and one person, or three beings and one being, but one being and three. Right. You're discussing metaphysics. You're talking about the ontology of God, one being, categorically one being, but also categorically three persons, one being that eternally exists as three persons, not three beings, three persons, one being, three persons. We're doing philosophy now.
That's absolutely right.
We call it theology because it's the study of God, but we're using, as Aquinas said, philosophy as the handmaiden of theology.
Right.
And I like what C.S. Lewis said in his lecture, Learning in Wartime. He said, good philosophy must exist if for no other reason than because bad philosophy needs to be answered. Right. So, but before, and everyone's probably heard that quote, but before it, he's talking about if all the world was Christian, it may not be necessary. But we don't live in and there's many different ideas out there. And when you engage these ideas, it's good to have a well-trained mind to do it. So philosophy and all of those branches, I'd say metaphysics and ethics, when we're talking about biblical morality and we're talking about God's nature and God's ways and man's nature, metaphysics and ethics are going to become really important. Branches of philosophy when you're doing theology. And of course, I would also say that logic becomes absolutely necessary, because another thing that C.S. Lewis also said, and this isn't an exact quote, but it's pretty much the gist of what he said. He says, nonsense doesn't stop being nonsense just because God is the subject of your conversation. Right? Yeah, right. So a lot of times people, because they think they're talking about religious stuff or Christian stuff, they'll start spewing nonsense because they'll read something out of the Bible, usually out of context, usually has nothing to do with what they're saying, and then they spew all this kind of nonsense.
Right.
You've seen this probably in a lot of the prosperity gospel stuff.
Oh, sure, man. I mean, I don't know I can't remember if we talked about this or not, but that's the background I come out of, man. I mean, when I was younger, Kenneth Copeland was the man in my household. You know what I mean? Like, we was listening to Kenneth Copeland, Creflo, all those guys, man. Benny Hinn, you name it. That's what I grew up on, and thank God, he brought me out of that. But I know all about it.
But a philosophically trained mind, one that understands how reality works and logic, and anyone remotely familiar with the Bible would catch how much just nonsense comes out of their mouths. Now, I will say that because of some nonsense from Kenneth Copeland, we did get a remix jam that lit up Facebook that I thought was the COVID-19 thing.
COVID-19. Yeah.
That's the only good thing I can think of that comes out of it. And that wasn't because of Kenneth Copeland. That was somebody.
Somebody did a phenomenal job.
What he meant for evil, somebody meant for good. So.
Somebody remixed for good.
That's right. There you go. Yeah, so that's the only good. That's the only good thing I can say about Kenneth Copeland is he provided good source material.
He gave us a hit, man. There you go. There you go. You know. Now I got to shift gears. I was debating whether I was going to say this or not, but I mean, based on something you just said, I feel like I got to get this out here. This is one of my personal pet peeves. Now, this is not all Calvinists or all Reformed folks, and I'm not taking a jab at Calvinism proper or anything like that. I'm just saying that one thing that I often hear from my Calvinist friends is in critiquing whether it be Molinism or certain perspectives of Arminianism or Leighton Flowers, for example. Sometimes when I hear them critiquing him, they'll say "Oh, well, he just that's just philosophy, or he's just talking philosophy right now." Yeah. And I'm like, man, like, do you guys even understand that on your side of the house that there's all sorts of philosophical presumptions, or just I'll say philosophical claims and so forth. And I just, for the life of me, I don't understand how they don't see that.
The more clever Calvinists won't do that because they know better. Right. But it is a popular sentiment among a lot of Calvinists, even Calvinists who should know better, who will say, "Oh, that's just philosophy, blah blah," or starts with philosophy.
Right.
James White says things like that.
Oh, sure.
Thomas Schreiner says things like that. If he was honest, his co-pilot Bruce Ware would kind of cringe because Bruce Ware is a little bit more philosophically minded. So they're like the dynamic duo. Yeah, they're the dynamic duo, and I just wonder, because if I was Bruce Ware and Thomas Schreiner was my buddy saying this kind of stuff, and I'm on stage with him and he says something about philosophy, and I'd be like.
Well, I think sometimes it's like,
if Braxton ever said something like that, I'd just be like, and you would see me on camera doing it. But Braxton's too clever to do that. Like, there are Calvinists who are too clever to do that. Because what they don't understand, when Calvinists can read a verse, Romans 9:16, it does not depend on the one willing or the one running, but God who has mercy. Right? Mm-hmm. Bam! And I'm like, I agree with everything you just said about those words. Those words I agree with those words. But then you started to explain what those words meant, and you brought in all kinds of metaphysical claims about providence, metaphysical. That's all philosophy. So why is it that I can agree with every word in the Bible, just like you say you do, but we think it means different things? Well, most of that's where they take a text and then they start spewing metaphysics. But guess what? I'll take a text and also start spewing metaphysics. The difference is I will admit that's what I'm doing.
Right.
Because we all have and of course, these same type of people who say, "Oh, you start with philosophy, not the Bible." Well, that's not true. Actually, you can't start with the Bible. You're always starting with a philosophy. The question is whether it's good or bad philosophy.
True.
Because somebody will say, "No, I start with exegesis." Okay, what's your method? And the second you make a statement about your method, you've done philosophy. Mm-hmm. Why your method of exegesis and hermeneutics? Why not some other? Oh, okay, that's philosophy now.
Right.
You think the Bible should be read? Okay, you think that as opposed to feminist hermeneutics, grammatical historical hermeneutics is the right one. Okay, I agree with that. But what makes that so? Oh, you're going to start giving me some philosophical foundations for why we should. Okay, so you've done philosophy before you've read a sentence of the Bible, whether you know it or not.
Exactly. And I think that's what's fascinating. Like, to me, and I think you would agree with this, is that if I were to say to somebody, okay, if you're going to exegete this passage, then you want to have a solid hermeneutical framework. You know what I'm saying? You want to be dealing with somebody who's can walk their way through the text and treat it properly. I don't think anybody would have a problem with that. You know what I'm saying? Oh, yeah, hermeneutics. Or let's say we're talking about textual criticism. You want to have somebody who knows their stuff as far as the languages and can, deal with this, tree of manuscripts versus that one. I mean, that's fine. Ain't nobody have a problem with that. But all of a sudden, if we say we want to bring the skill set of the philosopher to the table, then all of a sudden it's like, oh, whoa, wait a minute, no, now you're bringing in this foreign entity and we can't do all that. It's like, well, no, this is just another skill set that can be helpful, like you said, with Aquinas, it can be this handmaiden to properly handling God's word.
Yes, because you're already doing philosophy. So become good at it since you're doing it anyway. Because being bad at it has caused a lot of mess. And so even with hermeneutics, so you can't even read the Bible until you've decided how you're going to read it. Mm-hmm. You've already have a preconceived notion of how you're going to read it and how you're going to exegete the passages. And another thing I've heard is we should get our philosophy from the Bible, not bring it to the Bible. And I'm like, okay, hang on. How did you do that? When we already discussed the hermeneutic problem that hermeneutics is rooted in philosophy. Right. Your philosophy of exegesis, right? The word just means to draw out, but what are you going to marshal to draw out? Oh, now we're talking about, and then you ask why, you're going to do even more philosophy. Right. But even then, okay, so how do you get your philosophy from the text? You don't, because the Bible's not a philosophy textbook any more than it's a systematic theology textbook. It's mostly a set of stories and poetry, and letters that are troubleshooting letters, solving problems in the New Testament. Sure. So no, it doesn't. It's not just a systematic theology textbook. So, if you read a sentence, the popular one we just kind of did a wordplay on earlier, Genesis 50:20. I can listen to Leighton Flowers who's my friend, and I can listen to Chris Date, who's my friend, argue with each other for hours on Unbelievable and on their own podcast about Genesis 50:20. Right. What you meant for evil, God meant for good to bring about the salvation of many people. Okay. In that one verse, Leighton can construct this whole metaphysics about, and I agree with about what that implies. Sure. To him, it's God foreknew a situation was going to happen. He allowed it to happen, and then within the free actions of the creatures, and was able to redeem that situation to bring about good. So in that sense, God meant it for good, even though they meant it for evil. Right. Chris Date will say, so that's his metaphysics. I think his are right. Chris Date's set of metaphysics that means that from eternity past, God ordained these people to do these actions that's in accordance with their nature, but it's ultimately God's decree. They wouldn't do it had God not decreed it. To have these inclinations and desires that move their volitional actions to do the evil things because it's God's decree. Right. But God meant all that to happen because God also decreed that he would make it good. Okay? So that's the compatibilist, deterministic scheme, whereas Leighton Flowers would be of a more God's wisdom in maneuvering around libertarian free creatures. Okay. That's a whole lot of gibberish that I just said from a sentence. What you meant for evil, God meant for good. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, a whole lot of packaging coming in. Philosophy. Look at two completely different kinds of philosophy. Now, which one were we supposed to get out of the Bible? Because you say it's this one, and I say and Leighton Flowers says it's this one. But all that the Bible said was what you meant for good, or what you meant for evil, God meant for good. That's the sentence. Right. It doesn't give you all of these it doesn't give you his, it doesn't give you mine. And that's why this is my pet peeve. Because I think it's so unfair to, kind of put that, you're just kind of being philosophical, put that on other folks when you're making just as many philosophical assumptions. I've been keeping track with your boy Braxton, man, and Leighton as well. They've been doing teaming up with Tim Stratton in response to Guillaume Bignon. And that's been like a trilogy of theology and philosophy, kind of all wrapped into one. And on Bignon's side of the fence, I mean, he's a reformed philosopher. Yeah. I mean, that's what he's doing too. He's talking philosophy. I mean, you got some analytic philosophy in there where he's breaking down what he believes sovereignty means, or what it means for us to have free will or will rather, and all that sort of thing. He's doing philosophy. And so he's on their side of the fence. I don't think they would be critical of him. But all of a sudden, you have like the side 10 Brugenkates, or that might be a bad example, but you have like, others who will take jabs at
reform cats, for dipping into philosophy. I'm like, man, we're all doing that. The question is, who's doing it well? That's the question.
Yeah. You automatically go down in my book of when you start bad mouthing philosophy, because I'll typically hear about 70% philosophical ranting in their rants about philosophy. It's inherently philosophical, right? So it's a self-refuting tirade they go on.
Right. So, which actually I think kind of ties into something else I wanted to ask you. It's ridiculous. I agree. But again, I think these are the kinds of things as to why this move with liberty is so crucial, because these are the kind of things that really matter when you're churning out leaders, and apologists and pastors and so on and so forth. Like, these little nuances really matter, And so, kind of coming back to you, like in your position as being someone who's preparing folks for the life of ministry, like, what are some things that you do to kind of turn their attention to how to properly marry, philosophy and theology, and then turn out ministers who are going to handle their office and the Word of God responsibly?
Yeah. So when you de-emphasize philosophy, you have people doing it without any checks or balances. And so what happens, what I've always seen happen is you drift into more and more nonsense, and nobody's calling you out on it. Now, people outside of your institution might call you out on it, but you don't see the inconsistencies going on when you've devalued philosophy, which is why we don't do that here. As far as what I'm concerned with, and I can't make everyone agree with me, but I can make my case and have some people buy into it and understand where I'm coming from, to where they think, yeah, I want to do that. Is I believe in balance, because one of the things I don't want to do at Trinity is say, here's an intro to philosophy textbook, okay, to an undergraduate, and say, read this and you'll be good. You've done the philosophy thing. You've got your feet wet. Okay. Now
here's that box.
And here's our introduction to logic textbook. Read this and you should be set. No, because you don't get the mind of a Ravi Zacharias, and you don't get the mind of even like an R.C. Sproul, who we've lost here recently. Or
Geisler.
Geisler. You don't get the mind of a Geisler or a C.S. Lewis or any of these kind of guys without reading the types of books that I have directly behind my head. Now, I don't know. I'm going to give you a little tour here. All
right, okay, there we go.
Along this wall here. See those books along the wall? Okay. In addition to the thousands of books in Logos and Kindle, those are all my theology books and biblical studies books and all of that. Now, that island in the middle and the bookshelf behind it, and yes, that's a DJ coffin.
Okay, all right, bro. That's what's up.
From my glory days. But the books behind me, those in this little island here and then the shelf behind it, those are all books like great books of the Western world, the Harvard classics, classic literature, things like that. People don't know, but even a book like Moby Dick, you think it's about a guy hunting the whale. It's a very philosophical book is what it is.
Sure, yeah.
Story. Dostoevsky, you should read The Brothers Karamazov, all that stuff. Going all the way back to Homer. Okay. So those are the kinds of books that I want Trinity students to read, not just the introduction to philosophy book. They need to read what Plato said, not what later scholars think Plato said. One of the C.S. Lewis wrote the foreword to Athanasius, the popular patristics version of the Incarnation.
Okay.
And one of the things that he said in that foreword was that you can have people read books about Plato and they're mostly incomprehensible. But you can read Plato, and pretty much anyone can read Plato and pretty much get what he says.
I know what you're saying. Yeah, right.
And he's right. When you read, that's why I same thing with theology. I don't want you to read a book about John Calvin written by Steve Lawson. Go read the Institutes. I'm not a Calvinist. I love reading the Institutes. I'm not Augustinian. I love reading Augustine. I love perfect blend of theology.
It broadens the mind. Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And see, what you find is, what you find when you're more philosophically trained is it's you can read something and like it and not agree with it, but don't think that you have to beat it. It's like I can read parts of John Calvin and say, nope. I can read parts of John Calvin and say, yep. I can read other parts of John Calvin and say, yeah, but, or no, but.
Right,
and then get on with my life, and where we disagree or where we can find common ground, great. Where we don't, great. But I still benefited from having read it. I think that our Calvinist friends would, if they were grown-ups, and the ones who are grown-ups do this, if they would read Arminius. Well, heck, if Arminians would at least read Arminius,
Yeah, right.
If you
most
read
of them don't even know who he is. They just
which I've got his complete works back there too, right there next to Johnathan Edwards, who's also.
Oh wow! Look at that. Okay.
Yeah, Johnathan Edwards. He's a really fun philosopher, right? I mean, people don't know this about Edwards, but people think of him. Oh, sinners in the hand of an angry God, and all of his theological tracts and his sermons or what. No, he was a philosopher. Did you know that he was an occasionalist? He believes that God recreates the cosmos every microsecond or so, and we don't even notice.
Oh no, I had no idea. I didn't know that.
Yeah, he's a big time fatalist.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I can't lift my hand unless God makes it happen. I mean,
Right.
And we wouldn't even know if the universe was different 2 seconds ago because God just keeps recreating it.
He recreate every. I guess I don't even know what mark of time that would be, but instance, I guess.
It's occasionalism, but it's sometimes called continual creationism.
Interesting.
Right?
Okay.
Yeah, he's also a panentheist and an idealist. Yeah.
So, I guess you'd have to be like a soft panentheist. I guess I would assume, or.
No, it's pretty well. A. Hodge, who was a Reformed systematic theologian back in the day, like Charles Hodge.
Yeah.
A. Hodge accused him of being a pantheist. Now, I think that's too far.
Okay.
But he was panentheist. And
really?
He was also an idealist, kind of like inspiring philosophy. And
I didn't know
Berkeley.
that.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Idealism is the idea that everything is reducible to ideas and not matter is only matter insofar as you have an idea of matter. Okay, but it's not really matter.
What's interesting? Now I don't want to go too far afield there, but you said something interesting, and I'm easily distracted. I guess I get ADD or something like that. But if I was going to be an idealist, then I guess being an occasionalist actually kind of makes sense. I can see how that coheres because theoretically we're all in God's mind, and so whatever reality is just like one of his thoughts after another or something like that. So in a sense, you could be. I guess he would be creating things as he goes because he's like thinking through whatever we believe to be reality. Like, would that be kind of where he goes with it, or?
Well, I mean, yeah, it's kind of in the sense of nothing happens apart from God. God's active will directs everything, including all of my words and stuff. So it's that's why it was people were confused about things because when you take idealism and fatalism, you're stuck with a panentheism, if not pantheism. Pantheism is always this is two things they never tell you about Calvinism that honest Calvinists will tell you.
Okay.
Well, three things. In Calvinism, there are three dangers. Theological liberalism. Look at Europe. When people say Calvinism is the bulwark against theological liberalism, no, look at the Calvinists and Lutherans in Europe. Their liberalism came by way of Calvinism. Okay? And the PCUSA here in the ELCA for the Lutheran wing. People are like, well, the PCUSA is not real Calvin. That's the no true Scotsman fallacy.
I got you. Okay.
So theology. I'm not talking about like political liberal. I'm talking about theology liberal.
No, I got you. Yeah. Sure.
Universalism is a danger more for Calvinists than for any other people. There are more Calvinist universalists then there are other types of universe. People don't know that either. But Calvinism prefers universalism.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you've got liberalism and you've got universalism, and then you've got pantheism. Because when you misdefine sovereignty as straight determinism, it's not a far leap to fatalism. But when you have an active agent being the only active agent, then everything becomes that agent, and and it's not a hard leap to go from. So when you take,
I never thought about that. That's interesting. Yeah, I didn't. I never thought about that. That's interesting.
So when you take Edwards' fatalism and his idealism, it's easy to see where people would say pantheism, but it was panentheism. Now I think I'm not a panentheist, but I think that there is a sort of, like you said, soft panentheism that is compatible with orthodoxy. I want
to say, was it Saint
especially
Gregor on this sort of thing?
Yeah, if you couple it with idealism, it's got to be that way, because matter is not what you think it is, right? But the whole reason I brought up Edwards as an example of all this is how much people don't talk about it, but how much philosophy is there in the mind of the theologians.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Augustine was also very philosophically minded.
Oh, of course. Yeah, absolutely.
Much as a brilliant guy. And you can read Augustine and even if you're not in that Augustinian tradition, you could benefit greatly from reading. I mean,
brilliant. Certainly. Oh, yeah. No question. Yeah.
And even on the question of, predestination and all that, even if you don't agree where he ended up, there's a lot of his early writings that you would probably agree with, Sure. That he went back on, but still they're there.
Right. So there's no way around it. I mean, to your point, I mean, if you're going to be, because I think any responsible theologian, you want to some extent, evaluate your theological positions based upon what you see in church history. The history of the church is going to have some bearing on, at least in terms of how you reflect on theological issues, or it should, I should say. You want to be consulting, the giants that we stand upon, I would think. And if you're going to do that, then you've got to grapple with individuals who, for thousands of years now, have utilized their skill set in philosophy to inform their decisions. So even if it's by like a secondhand smoke sort of a way, one way or another, you're going to be dealing with more than just the text on the page of the Bible. You're going to be dealing with somebody's philosophy. I mean, there's just no way around that.
Yeah, and I don't want to pick on our Calvinist friends too much because
right.
Because there are some. Paul Helm, for example, is a very prominent Calvinist philosopher.
Oh yeah.
And I think he gets a little bit cringy at some of his fellow Cal. But of course, I grew up in some Southern Baptist traditions, where in a lot of Reformed traditions, they actually do appreciate philosophy. And I tip the hat to the Reformed community, especially the Reformed homeschool community, who is doing the classical Christian education in their homeschooling curriculums, where they read the great books of the Western world, whether it's Homer or Tacitus, or it's they'll even read like Bunyan, and they'll read Pilgrim's Progress and all that.
Sure.
They take that stuff seriously, and so there are a lot of people in the Reform movement that take philosophy very serious, and they take the history of ideas very seriously. And then in my Southern Baptist context, there are a lot of non-Calvinists who say the same things about man's philosophy, and even worse, they say man's logic. At least Calvinists don't go that far. Right. And I'm like, logic is just logic. I mean,
it's just logic, right.
There's no such thing as man's. There's irrationality, and there's logic.
Right.
So I hear a lot of non-Calvinists badmouth philosophy.
Yeah, very true. Yeah, can't argue with that. Yeah,
but it's less so the prominent non-Calvinists. Whereas you do have prominent non-Calvinists whining about philosophy while they do lots and lots of philosophy.
Right. And actually, kind of tying back to something you said earlier, and I'm thinking about, and I definitely want to get your thoughts on this too, in terms of like the pitfalls of not appreciating, the role of philosophy and understanding Scripture and so forth. Oh, I love those drinks, man. Is that the apple one? Is that what that is?
No, this is mixed berry.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I love those, man. I got you. I drink like 5 of them a week. Well, I probably shouldn't, but I do.
The Kroger brand?
Oh, is that Kroger? Oh, okay. No, I think I've been on the Food Line brand. Is that Kroger?
Oh, this is Kroger.
I guess they all have a different one. They all have their own version, you know.
Yeah, this is sparkling water.
Yeah.
I believe it or not, I'm known for drinking Kroger brand's Mountain Dew knockoff called Diet Citrus Drop.
Okay.
But I'm trying to be healthier. But I didn't want to cut out sodas completely, so I basically just drink them on the weekends now. And so I've replaced it with sparkling water because I still like that carbonation taste.
Yeah, I'm with you on that, man. I was a big Pepsi and Coke guy, but kind of about 50-50 on them, but I kind of fell off with it. But yeah, so in terms of some of the pitfalls of not appreciating philosophy, excuse me, I think going back to your previous comment about the Word of Faith movement, looking back on my experiences, I can definitely see how not being philosophically inclined, allowed me to just imbibe straight up heresies, quite frankly. That there's no way that a clear thinking person would give any time to if they really were working through the text with some sort of I wouldn't even say affinity, but just kind of awareness for some of the philosophical, just garbage that's being lobbed at them, from the pulpit. So even the everyday believer you can experience a shipwreck in your faith. You know what I'm saying? Like, so just to kind of make it more explicit, like my wife and I, for example, we had a miscarriage early on in our marriage, right? Now, that occurred, I want to say maybe a year and a half after I had gotten out of, the Word of Faith movement. Now, Word of Faith Adam, I don't know if that would be Adam Prime or what that would be, but, Word of Faith Adam would have attributed something like that to, well, maybe I missed a tithing payment, or maybe I didn't have enough faith. Maybe that faith muscle wasn't working like it needed to be, and I allowed for this. There's a number of different things I could have found fault for myself and beat myself up about it based upon just bad teaching, from the Word of Faith movement. However, having come out of that and having studied up on the problem of evil and really grappling with the brokenness of this world and understanding that, there's evil. It's just like Jesus says, in this world you should have tribulation, and really being able to wrestle with that in a more robust way. I was able to navigate it in a way that my Word of Faith Adam, certainly could not have. As a matter of fact, I don't know if I'd be a Christian today if I still had that frame of mind and was trying to wrestle with, such a heinous situation. So it's, what you're talking about is real deal. It's not something that's just kind of abstract and out there. There's a real rubber meets the road. There are real rubber meets the road implications for Christians, in terms of being, sharper philosophically.
Yeah. And it's especially, it's helpful, not because in the prosperity movement, for example, the teaching is it's almost a kind of a legalism in the sense, and it's almost kind of like a manual in a sense, where if you do this, this, and this, or if you speak this, this, and this, these things will come to you. Right. Now, and for most people, they will try that, and they will always, when it doesn't happen, see themselves as like you said, it's a deficiency in you. Right. Because because if you would just do X, Y, and Z better, then God would have to give you everything that you want. Exactly. Everything that you ask for. Exactly. Well, that doesn't come from solid exegesis of any biblical text. Not at all. But it also, you have to wonder, okay, if God is my creator and my Lord, why would it work that way? If he's my Father in heaven, why would it work that way? If I read any bit of my Bible, I would know that, if he's not going to let the lilies and the birds and all of that just decay for nothing, he's going to provide for me too. Mm-hmm. We're God's children. Mm-hmm. You don't have to just read the Gospels. So why would it work that way? And a philosophically trained mind would pick up that I can't ask God for $1 million and him just hand it to me if I just believe enough. Because you think about what is believing enough. How do I sit here and just believe and think it enough? Right. You're gonna be like, wait a minute, that's a non sequitur. That didn't follow. That doesn't make any sense.
Right, right.
So a little bit of philosophically trained mind and logic would, even if you've never read the Bible,
Right.
would help you out. Now, logic comes into play. There's a lot of political stuff going. It's an election year, okay?
Okay.
And right now, we have a pandemic going on, right? Okay? And so what I hear a lot is there's this big debate. Do we open things back up or do we not open things back up?
Right, right.
This is why I get on people's nerves, okay?
Okay, all right.
If you hear we should not open back up because more people will die, or if you hear we should open things up because people will lose their jobs if we don't, or more people will, what's the problem with both of those things? Well, in logical fallacies, it's called appeal to pity. Both of them are appeals to pity.
That's true.
Appeal to emotion.
That's true, yeah.
Neither one is a rational basis to either stay locked down or to open back up. You've got to find other ways to make your case.
Good point. Good point.
So I hear this stuff and I'm like, well, give me something else, and that gets on people's nerves because they're like, yeah, but Pete, we're talking about people, we're talking about their lives, or we're talking about their job, we're talking about yeah, we are. I hear you. It's affecting a lot of people, but what is that? That's just because people will die or because people will be out of work. You're just telling me bad consequences. All
right, so now you say I got to go here. Now I know this wasn't on our agenda because since you've opened up this can of worms,
right?
But I think this does kind of tie in somewhat. So I think that when Christians don't have an appreciation for the robust philosophical framework that the biblical worldview can offer, then what can happen is as we tether ourselves to other groups or causes or what have you, we end up taking on their philosophical framework or freight, so to speak. You know what I'm saying? Because we're not aware of our own. And so what I mean by that, so for example, like you've got like liberals and conservatives, right? Now, obviously, I know that there's
politics.
Yeah, I'm talking about politics. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yeah. So politically speaking, you got your liberals, you got your conservatives, and people who are all across the spectrum. And I think that what happens when Christians aren't aware that we've got all these philosophical tools in our bag, we end up picking up somebody else's bag or mistaking their bag of philosophical tools for ours. You know what I'm saying? So in the case of the conservatives, I think there's this assumption that conservatism is like the political extension of the church. Where if you really understand, conservatism is a hodgepodge. You have some biblical ideas mixed in there. There's no doubt about that. But you also have some philosophical framework from the Enlightenment. And then likewise on the liberal side of the house, I mean, there's some biblical ideas about, community and caring about people. But then there's also some other ideas woven in there as well from other sources. And I think Christians can be kind of pulled back and forth when we don't really have an awareness that we're stepping to the table with a particular worldview and a batch of philosophical underpinnings to that. You know what I'm saying? And if we're not careful or if we're not aware of that, then we can easily be drawn in by groups that aren't explicitly Christian. Does that make sense? Or
yeah, and the same thing. Let me give an illustration. What you're talking about in politics, I'll use it in a church context. Okay, so on theology. So when we're talking about metaphysics, if you don't have a philosophically trained mind, when somebody reads Genesis 50:20, what you meant for evil, God meant for good. And then then Leighton Flowers gives you all of his metaphysics. Or you're in Chris Date's church and you hear all of those metaphysics of providence and determinism and human will and all of this other stuff. Okay. If you don't have a philosophically trained mind, the text says neither one of those things, right? It just says what you meant for evil, God meant for good. That's all you've got is what it says.
Right.
And this guy's saying this is what it means, or you hear this person say, and you don't hear anything else, and you don't have a philosophically trained mind, you're going to just buy into, well, I guess that's what it means, and you're going to pick what you heard.
Right.
Okay, well, the same thing happens in politics. If you don't have a philosophically trained mind, and you and your friends, just like you and your church heard that guy, you and your friends hear this politician, And if you don't have a philosophically trained mind, or you live in an echo chamber, which is also a problem, the only time anyone ever leaves their echo chambers these days is to argue with other people from their echo chamber.
That's true.
They don't have any interest in communicating or learning. They just want to argue and then go back to their own corners.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a problem. And if you don't have a philosophically trained mind, you can't sift through the bogus nonsense that you hear from both.
Right.
And you don't check your own nonsense, right? Because as much as I want to say I'm philosophically trained, I'm trained enough to know that every now and then I slip into nonsense.
Sure, yeah.
Right? And
I've never experienced that personally, but I mean, I'm sure that people do.
Yeah, I know you're infallible, but I'm not infallible.
Right.
And so sometimes I find myself spewing nonsense because I want to believe it, not because I think it's rational.
Yeah, that can happen to anybody. Right.
Whether it's politics or theological positions or whatever. And so being better trained, it can make you wiser. It can also make you a little bit more cynical, and you got to keep that in check.
Interesting. Okay.
Because then you become annoying, like me sometimes when people ask me, should we reopen the economy because people will lose their jobs? Should we keep the economy closed because people will die? Well, I have thoughts on it, but I don't think that we should keep it closed or open it up, because if we open it up, people will die, because that's just, well, okay, but people die when you get in cars. You're just appealing to pity at that point. Or people are going to lose their jobs. Well, yeah, but people get laid off for other reasons. I mean, not like this, but people get that in and of itself. That's just, well, I feel bad for those people. But that's a different question as to whether we should all go outside again. I mean, so I want to hear arguments. I don't want to hear appeals to pity.
Right.
And so that's just one example. You can find this all over the political spectrum.
Sure.
The appeal, they're effective. They're just fallacious. But if
that's an important distinction, though, Jay. Just because an argument is effective doesn't mean that it's not fallacious. I mean, you can have an argument that's just really compelling. If somebody else is susceptible to feeling pity, then the argument for pity will do well.
And I just because I want to be clear, I don't want people to get sick, and I don't want people to lose their jobs. Okay,
right.
I care about people's lives. I care about people's jobs. What I'm saying is the argument, we should do this because if we don't, then X. And if that X is people die, people lose their jobs, somebody might get sick, somebody's feeling, we should do this, or otherwise people will have their feelings hurt, or be sad or unhappy.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Anytime that is the because, is some sort of appeal to, it'll make someone sad, or it'll hurt somebody, or somebody will lose their job, or somebody might get sick, or somebody will be depressed.
Right.
Those aren't reasons to do it.
Right.
You're just trying to make me feel pity towards something.
Now, I saw you cough there a second ago. That wasn't the COVID-19, was it, man? We don't need to say a prayer for you, do we?
No. That's when I get to talking too much. I get spit caught in my throat, so it doesn't come out on the screen, and I look worse than coughing.
So you had to quarantine that microphone for a couple hours or something,
No, I've been relatively safe. I've been COVID free because I'm pretty good at social distancing, man.
Social distancing champ,
Except with Braxton, for some reason I have to sit in. We started doing Trinity Radio again.
Oh, okay, got you.
And so now in the office, so now I'm sitting next to him, but he's a germaphobe, so he's never around other people much either. So
man after my own heart, man. I'm the same way. Same way, But I mean, so to kind of round up that point, I mean, I think that actually, I think this COVID-19 situation is a perfect example. I think that in some ways, the brokenness of this world and the fallenness of man is really beyond mankind's ability to manage or contain, so to speak. And I think that sometimes when you have crisis situations like these, it's like the resources that we have to generally make it in the world, we realize how feeble those resources are, even ideologically. I mean, right now, I was talking to a friend of mine the other day about this open or not open type thing. And, we were just saying, I was just saying that, we live in a culture that's just dead set on being individualistic. I mean, we're far more individualistic than chronologically most cultures have been, or even geographically how most cultures tend to be.
Yeah.
And so I think that has implications in terms of how we interpret our route to navigating this whole COVID thing, because you have folks say, well, I got the right to do this, and I should be able to do it. It's like, well, yeah, that's true, but that's a very individualistic way to look at it. I mean, if you live in a communal culture that was at least more aware of how interlinked we all are, then you may look at it a little bit differently. Now, that's not necessarily a criticism, but I think it's just one of those things where we don't really think about our thinking a lot.
Well, it affects the way you think. So the Western world, the United States, even the more collectivist people within the United are still far more individualistic than most places in the East.
Sure.
And of course, the entire ancient world was collectivist. So every biblical text you've ever read comes from collectivist cultures.
Sure.
So the way we think about those kind of things is just fundamentally different. So, if you haven't taken a basic cultural anthropology class or sociology, you might not know the difference between collectivism and individualism.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And same thing, the more individualist we are, the more guilt-oriented we are instead of honor-shame, whereas most collectivist cultures are more honor-shame.
True. Okay.
And the biblical, when your biblical texts come from honor-shame collectivist cultures.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the dynamics. So our thing is going to be more, and our nation was founded on, it's inscribed in our law, this kind of individualism that started really 500-600 years ago in its modern ways. It's been just kind of, individualism has become increasingly the way we think in the West. There's a trajectory there.
Right.
Probably since the Reformation. There's a good book on that, From Dawn to Decadence by Jacques Barzun, that traces individualism and, among other things, from 1500 to the present, the time that he wrote the book.
Okay.
But yeah, collectivist cultures are going to think differently. You're thinking holistically about everybody and greater goods and impact. Now, it's the wrong, like you said, it's something to think about. There's no way that you can say, is collectivism or individualism better?
Gotcha. Right.
It's not a question of, it's what is it?
Right.
What is our culture?
Right.
And of course, our culture is individualistic. That's why you can't get people who are used to individualism to think in terms of how a collectivist would think.
Sure.
Collectivist cultures, people have a self-identity based upon others, how others see them, their value as a member of the in-group. They don't have a self-identity the way that modern individualist people think.
Sure, yeah.
Right? We think of defining ourselves in a retrospective internalization of our conscious experience that we express outwardly. Somebody in a collectivist culture, their entire identity is wrapped up of how others esteem them. It has nothing to do with how their sense of self-understanding. It's other understanding of me, right? So it's we then me, and the only thing about me is how am I rated among the we, right? So in an individualist culture, we think I'm going to express myself. So you can tell the difference in individualist cultures by the variety of individuals you see. Not everyone dresses the same. People have different forms of self-expression.
Right.
Some people like lots of tattoos and hair that looks like a bag of Skittles. Other people are more conservative. Some people dress in baggier clothes. Some people wear skinny jeans. Some people wear suits and ties, even when they're not at work. People have their own sense of. They construct their individual selves. We do avatars. They don't do avatars in collectivist cultures.
Well, to your point, like within an individualistic society, the we is an extension of the me. Whereas for the collectivists is the other way around. Like the me is an extension of the we. And I think that this so, and that's why I was saying, because when you think about so then as a Christian. How do I engage societies like that, and really come from a worldview that is biblically aligned. I think that what you end up finding is that you're going to be in any setting, you're going to find yourself in some ways out of step with the majority, because the scriptures are going to give you something that's more universal, and or maybe I say adaptive in ways that those more rigid tethering to one of the individualism or collectivism won't give you. Does that make sense? Or
well, yeah, but I'll tell you this: the reason why Christianity is exploding in places like China and places in Africa is because the Bible is more understandable to them, because it's a collectivist document. They don't read the text in exactly the same ways we do. What we have is what sometimes I think I've heard either Dr. Brown, I can't remember if it was Dr. Brown or even Leighton Flowers or somebody called it the narcissistic exegesis, where if God selected Jeremiah or Paul from the womb, he did me too.
Yeah.
And every statement about said to anybody generally is a statement to me. I read myself in every biblical text. Jesus says this to me. I see that, if he said it to the first century Jews in Palestine, he said it to me.
Right. Now that's word of faith all day. There's no doubt about that. Yeah.
And that's not how they read text, because they know better.
Yeah, it's good. It's good.
And they pick up on so many cues in the text, even in translation, that we don't pick up on because we are thinking individualistically as opposed to collectively, and they get a whole lot more of it because they understand the dynamics of honor shame than we get, because we're not an honor shame culture. We're a guilt culture. Those are all interesting things to think about. That's why I think it's important, in addition to learning philosophy, is you should learn some at least basic sociology and anthropology as well.
Sure. That's a good
live
point.
in.
Right.
Those are all important things.
Yeah, and I mean, certainly, I think that, and I know we've kind of gone a little straight, and it's my fault, man. I mean,
that's fine.
When people say something interesting, I can't help myself. I have to ask questions, because that's how I learn. I'm an oral learner for the most part. So, but kind of, tying it back around, I know I don't want to keep you, too much longer. But like you said, these things are important, and not just philosophy, but as you point out, like sociology, anthropology, and kind of having a robust biblical view of these various different fields is very important, And so, so for somebody like yourself, I know we've kind of talked about liberty a little bit. I think we've kind of, you've expressed yourself on that, but being at Trinity,
probably in a way that upset some people, but
hey, that's all right though. That's all right, man. I mean,
it's a bad move. It's a bad move. I don't think introduction to philosophy is enough, and
right.
I don't. I just don't. But yeah, I mean, philosophy is important, and when you're a big university like Liberty, I just want to say this.
Go ahead.
When you're a big kind of a standard bearer university, in a lot of cases, we're the big thing. When you cut a philosophy, when you gut the department, what you're saying is our terrible football team that barely ever wins is more important than philosophy. Our football team that nobody watches, nobody goes to the games. Nobody, right. I don't even know what division it is. It's so irrelevant.
I couldn't tell you. I don't know.
Right?
I don't know.
But we're going to cut philosophy because we didn't get. What you're saying is it's not important.
That's true, yeah, and that's sad. I mean, especially I think in today's times where for whatever reason, I do think people, at least in the church, are becoming more aware of the importance of equipping themselves. Now, I think apologetics has a long way to go, but I do think that we've seen some growth, and there's a tide coming. It's already here. In terms of the average layperson being confronted with objections to the faith that they hadn't. A couple of years ago, maybe they didn't have to worry about. But with the internet and with just access to information, people are being challenged in ways that they haven't been in the past. And this is just the wrong time to be removing resources, from folks who really need them, I think, So, definitely.
The tools of philosophy help you become a better critical thinker. Mm-hmm. It helps you become a more sound thinker. And the more you start to learn stuff about arguments, the more you start to learn about logic. I always start with logic and then move to metaphysics, and epistemology, and aesthetics, and politics, and ethics, and all that stuff. But the more you start with logic and just learn, and then go to metaphysics, but when you start thinking more philosophically about things, you start finding how irrational everyone you know and even know and love behaves.
Right.
Okay? And you start seeing how irrational people act on social media. You start seeing how irrational politicians are on any party.
It's true.
And you start hearing how irrational certain pastors are and other Christians are. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't take you long to figure out where all that comes from. A lot of people think it comes from postmodernism. No one you know is postmodern. It just comes from an irrational relativism because it's bad education. No one knows better. It's not postmodernism. People always say, "Oh, we live in a postmodern." No, we don't. You don't know anyone who's postmodern. Mm-hmm. You know, the most postmodern thing most Americans have ever seen is the movie The Matrix. Right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's true. Yeah,
but they don't know that that's postmodernism.
Right. You just got cool fight scenes, man. It looks sweet.
Yeah, they're not reading that. They don't know. They're not. What they are is they're irrational relativists.
Right.
Because that's ultimately rooted in sin and self-centeredness. It's what I want, and that makes sense, and it should make sense to you. That's really what it's not postmodernism. It's just an irrational relativist, and it comes from bad education. So when you have a philosophically trained mind, you can cut through the nonsense and help clarify in your own thinking what they're saying, help clarify to them why what they're saying is nonsense, and be nice about it.
Right.
Especially if you're married to someone who's not philosophically minded, you'll get on their nerves quick.
Right.
But it just helps you cut through the clutter, whether it's politics or church or theology or social norms, whatever. You'll start to see all of these inputs, and we're getting more inputs now than any generation has ever gotten from.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
If you don't have a philosophically trained mind, you're going to absorb a lot of garbage in, garbage out. You're going to absorb a high threshold of nonsense. That's why I tell my apologist friends, look, atheism is not the biggest issue here. You know that.
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah, there's all sorts of foes.
It's irrational paganism. Mm-hmm. They won't call themselves pagans, but that's what they are.
That's absolutely true.
It's a spiritualized irrational paganism. That's what most non-Christians in the West are. They're not atheists.
That's exactly right, man.
Yeah, and you need to have the tools of philosophy to be able to engage them and help them see the folly of the nonsense that they're spewing, because it's mostly nonsense,
Yes, I mean, so it helps for you to navigate it yourself, but then, like you said, to be able to articulate it to others and help them, through it as well. You got to be a little sharp here, to really help them to kind of identify, where the fallacies are and stuff. Which kind of bring it full circle. I think Ravi was phenomenal at that. Like you said, bringing it down to the basic level, because I can study all the metaphysics in the world, but if I can't communicate it to the person that I'm dealing with, then how much good has it done me from an evangelistic standpoint?
You're right. That's why I tell you, say, okay, if you've already read Reasonable Faith, don't go read the 20 clones of that book that every apologist puts out. Go read Homer. Because if you're like, what do I would just go watch the Brad Pitt movie. No, go read Homer. Because you're going to be a Christian in Homer's world, because they may not have a pantheon of gods, right? That they call like Zeus and Aphrodite, and
I got you.
Apollo. But they have them. They're just not calling them by their name. But they have gods.
But
Everyone
they got them. Yeah,
gods,
that's right. Yeah.
Right? And Homer's world is utterly irrational. Mm-hmm. How do you navigate that world? Because you're in it. You are in it.
That's good.
And so you got to start with, because every nonsensical idea that you will hear has already been said before. Solomon was right. There's nothing new under the sun.
Nothing new under the sun, man. Yeah.
But one of the benefits of reading all those kinds of books that the great books of the Western world, and no, it's not books of just dead white men. That's a fallacy. It's not,
right. There you go. Yeah,
that's not what the great books are.
That's real.
Dead lots of kinds of people. Actually.
Yeah, all kinds of dead people.
But all the ideas that you hear now tether back to something that has already been hammered out in the past. And it's always good to go back to the root of something and cut it off there. and know where that comes from and where those ideas, because they've already been defeated. Somebody's just rehashing it.
Right.
And they've already, you've got the tools back there to defeat those ideas because they're just repackaged, but they've already been said and they've already been dealt with.
Right.
And that's why it's good to read all that great conversation that we talk about, because everything is reducible to a few basic principles. So you don't have to keep. This is a problem with apologetics. Apologists, and this is not original to me. I credit Dr. John Mark Reynolds said this in a lecture, and he's absolutely right.
Okay.
From back when I had him as a teacher back at Biola. He said apologists spend a lot of their time chasing all of these symptoms of problems that we have out here. We're always fighting symptoms because we never think to stop to go back and look at the root of the disease. See there when
there you go. Got you again.
We don't go back to the root of the disease and cut it off there.
Right.
We're spending 99% of our time arguing and trying to counter these symptoms of problems that we trying to put out all these fires, right? We spend 99% of our time doing that instead of using 99% of our time cutting it off at the root.
Yeah, and that's a fact.
We'd be more effective if we could just get it at the root, and then you wouldn't be spending all your time running around putting out all these fires that pop up everywhere.
That's insightful, man. That's insightful, bro. But hey, man, I kept you for like an hour and a half, man, and I apologize for that. I told you it was going to be an hour, but you can only blame yourself, man. You say something interesting, and I got to go there, But before we get out of here, just let people know how can they engage your work, where can they find you online, and that sort of thing.
Okay. Well, you can audit courses or become a student at Trinity College of the Bible Theological Seminary. You don't need to be a student at any seminary or any college of any kind to learn philosophy, by the way. But it's kind of good to have guides.
Yeah.
So if you can't find guides in your church, go to a good Bible college or seminary that's interested in these things, and one of the best ones is mine. So you can,
all right.
TrinitySim.edu.
All right.
Or you can go to youtube.com/Braxton Hunter and watch me on Trinity Radio. I'm never on Twitter much. I have a Twitter account. I think I don't know. I don't even know what it's at.
They've deactivated you because of non-use or something, or
no, it's still there, but I don't know what. I think it's at. Just look up Johnathan Pritchett and you'll see my picture. But I'm always on Facebook. Our group Trinity Radio Primetime Discussion. Love to have people there, so you can find me there. And if you didn't see Adam Coleman on our Trinity Radio, you need to go watch that program.
Absolutely, yeah.
That was good. So. I'm not everywhere. Those are Facebook and YouTube and at the seminaries where you can find me. So
hey, well that's dope, man. Well, hey, of course I appreciate you, man. It's been a long time coming. You know what I'm saying? Just the wealth of information you dropped, man. I appreciate it, dog. And I definitely want to invite you back, man. For sure. At some point, but not like 6 months from now. Like we've been playing this for a while, so.
Yeah, well, it's easier now that I'm back in the office, man. We can do this anytime you want. And we also need to do that thing that we talked about.
Oh yeah, it's
me
true.
And Braxton, and
we're
gonna drop that.
All right, let's make it happen. I'm dead serious. Let's make it happen.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, you and I can do. You and I are talented. I don't know if Braxton can. We'll have to show him a few things, but we need to get that done.
Yeah, we like ASAP. So.
I haven't done anything music related. The last project I worked on was like in 2011, I think.
Oh, we're in the same boat then.
Yeah, so it's been a long time.
Yeah.
But if other people can do it in their 40s, why can't we?
Why not? Jay-Z's still doing it. I'll give it a shot, But
yeah, but he makes millions of dollars to do it.
That's a good point. I don't know if we're going to make that,
We'll get 7 views on YouTube.
7 views and like 5 thumbs down.
That's right. Except for my wife. Well, no, she'll probably be one of the thumbs down. Like, what are you doing? Don't be a has-been. You never was.
That's hilarious, man. So, hey, y'all know what it is, man. Just want to say to the viewers, thanks for riding with us. Check us out. If you haven't already, subscribe to us here at Tru-ID Apologetics. And y'all know what it is. Love God, love people, and take care of the things that God blesses you with.
All right, man. Thank you very much.
Yeah.